მანქანები, რომლებსაც მოაქვთ მოსახლეობისთვის ჰუმანიტარული დახმარება და სავარაუდოდ რამდენიმე წუთში ისინი უკვე მოვლენ აქ და ისრევენ საბადოებს.
There's a lot of very brave and extraordinary work that goes on around the world from people who the public don't really know very much about. Politicians and society tends to be rather cynical about journalism, but I see enormous bravery, enormous challenge, great courage going on to surface things that the public really needs to know about.
Journalists go towards danger when others move away. Journalists have to get involved with all sides of the conflict in order to get the story.
It takes a very fearless journalist to get up every day and say, you know what, I'm determined to continue my profession, even though I may have to spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder.
I came here in 2003. I came to cover the US-led invasion. I got here about 3 weeks before the bombing campaign started, and I stayed for the next couple of years working on and off. I came because I thought the war was going to be covered pretty heavily in the Western media from the position of embedded journalists. You know, if I was going to take any risk at all, I'd rather take the risk making a story that wasn't being told. And I was concerned that the Iraqi perspective would be neglected. So I came and stayed in Baghdad and worked in Baghdad instead of working embedded with the US military.
It used to be that you could do a mix of both. I tried to keep it 50-50 so that I saw the war from the soldiers' point of view and I saw the war from the local Iraqis' point of view.
Journalists play this vital role as sort of an outside presence, an independent person to sort of see how this war is being conducted.
If you want to get to some of these stories, you have to take the risks of the people who are living through the same thing. And sometimes that means risking torture, risking kidnapping, risking death.
I faced a tremendous amount of danger. I was shot at several times. My car still bears the marks of bullets. I was chased several times. I got messages, letters taped on the outdoor of my house.
As the militants went from using us to reach the Western audience to just simply lumping us in with troops and foreigners as the enemy, we had to start embedding with the troops that was the safest option. That option, which used to be viewed as most dangerous, was now the least worst option. But when you travel with troops, you face the same risks. We wanted to go out with troops on Memorial Day. This was 4 months after ABC News anchor Bob Woodruff had been hit by an improvised explosive device, and he was still recuperating from a brain injury. What was supposed to be a routine shoot lasting a couple of hours ended in horrible tragedy. We ended up parked on a residential side street, dusty, quiet, just about deserted. And we got out of our vehicles. Paul Douglas and James Brolin were filming in our direction. Turns out the insurgents were watching. They command detonated an approximately 500-pound car bomb through all of us. It killed James, our sound man, instantly, left Paul fighting for his life. He did not make it. He died at the scene, killed the captain and his translator instantly, left me fighting for my life, along with 4 other soldiers. I technically died 5 times on the operating table. I had both femurs shattered, shrapnel to the brain, both eardrums blown out. I was burned from my hips to my ankles, but worst of all, my femoral artery was cut. So I bled out more than half my blood, they estimate. The other folks with me were equally horribly injured. So it was a handful for the surgeons to try to salvage. So.
Kidnapping was and is a very real problem in Iraq. Criminal gangs, militias roaming around, finding ways to extort money. This is why we've had doctors, academics, lawyers, a whole lot of Iraq's intelligentsia just flee the country because they're at grave risk of being kidnapped. Anyone is at risk who can fetch a better ransom.
You have to be thinking, okay, it doesn't matter that I'm a reporter. Now to them, I am a Westerner with a potential big price tag on my head.
Et on est allé faire un reportage avec Hussein, donc c'est le chauffeur, à l'université de Bagdad, où s'étaient réfugiés les habitants d'une ville bombardée par les États-Unis, la ville de Fallujah. Donc on fait notre interview, on est monté dans la voiture, on est sorti de l'université, quand une autre voiture nous a arrêtés, et des types avec des kalachnikovs nous ont fait sortir de la voiture. Et c'est vrai que vous avez vraiment l'impression d'être passé de l'autre côté du miroir. Je me souviens, j'étais dans cette voiture qui nous amenait, donc on était enlevés. Et je voyais à travers la vitre la vie qui continuait pour les gens, c'est-à-dire les gens dans les voitures à côté, avec un type qui fume, sa femme, des gens qui mettent la radio, il y a beaucoup d'embouteillages à Bagdad, donc on voyait bien. Et je savais que j'étais déjà dans cette voiture, dans un autre monde. C'était parti, quoi. Il n'y avait plus moyen d'arrêter. Et donc c'est d'autant plus étrange qu'il y a beaucoup de checkpoints, etc. Et on passait un checkpoint, je me disais, je me disais, tais-toi, baisse-toi pour pas qu'on nous voie. Et voilà, on a traversé le miroir.
You lose control, you become completely powerless just in a matter of seconds. They think they have this enormously valuable prisoner, they think they're going to get enormous ransoms.
My name is Florence Aubenas. I'm French. I'm journalist in Libération. Please, help me.
La négociation avec les preneurs d'otages se joue. Nous, on était enfermés dans une cave, on voyait personne. On était dans le noir, on avait très peu à manger, on ne se lavait pas. Donc on avait une vie d'animaux. Donc on était enchaînés par terre, donc c'était vraiment cette vie-là.
I ask especially Mr. Didier Julia, the French deputy. Please, Mr. Julia, help me, it's urgent.
Quand moi j'ai été otage, dans l'endroit où nous étions détenus, il y avait 13 autres personnes qui n'étaient pas journalistes. Il y avait un journaliste pour 13 citoyens. Nous, on n'est jamais que la face apparente, j'allais dire, d'une répression qui touche en général tout le monde quand elle arrive sur nous.
You know, as dangerous as it might seem sometimes in a place like that, you know, it's unstable where the government's really out of control or there's a lot of fighting and insecurity. If you make sort of friends who can show you the way and give you some support locally, then it's not as bad as it seems. In fact, I often felt like I was sort of protected by the people around me as best as anyone could be.
The basic rule is that you are only as good as the local journalist you're working with. They are by far the most important decision you'll make. They understand what's happening on the ground in a way you never can.
If you wanted to be a good journalist in Iraq, you had to risk your life. Other way, you can't do it. We risked our life to get the story, and it was worth it.
I really believe there's something called ground truth that journalists get when they go into a place, talk to local people, and they see with their own eyes what is happening, and there are facts that they can convey.
As you may have heard, a Reuters television soundman was killed today while driving in Baghdad. He was killed by US soldiers, and a cameraman was wounded. Unfortunately, this kind of thing is alarmingly common.
The Geneva Convention, of course, means that civilians can't be targeted, and journalists are, by definition, civilians. We have had people killed, it is really because the military says they cannot tell the difference of a journalist doing his work on the battlefield and someone who is on the battlefield for nefarious reasons. And so then the Geneva Convention, for all the protections that it grants civilians, does not help the journalist in the field. I do not believe that the military is anti-journalist. I do believe that the military is facing a very different kind of battlefield, where you don't know who's a friend and who's an enemy. It's a very frightening place for journalists and for soldiers.
About 1/3 of the journalists who get killed, which is about 1,000 over the last 2 decades, 1/3 of them are killed in armed conflict. The actual problem in terms of numbers is really on the local level. That's where most of the journalists get killed, not foreign correspondents, local journalists.
Particularly in the case of Iraq, we've seen more of our colleagues locally killed. They live there. The front line, if you like, is outside their front door.
AP doesn't have people parachuting in from outside. We have people who live and work in those countries. We feel that it's important to have folks who live in a place explain it to the world. In April of 2004, Bilal Hussein, a photographer for the Associated Press in Fallujah, was picked up by the military, which believed that he was working for insurgents and held him for what ultimately was 2 years without charges. During the U.S. Marines' siege of Fallujah, as they were trying to drive the insurgents out, Bilal stayed. It's his native city. He took a lot of pictures of insurgents fighting and lots of other scenes of, fighting and destruction and the citizens there. At the time, that was very controversial. And there was a lot of unhappiness that AP was showing both sides of the fighting.
Different people in those situations, whether it's the U.S. military or the contracting companies or the locals or a resistance group or whatever, are going to all perceive us in their own ways, and usually that means with suspicion and basically seeing us as a problem.
It did not stop us because that was the norms at the time. I definitely didn't know better. I thought it's a package, fulfilling the dream of being a mouthpiece for the Iraqis and getting the danger that comes with it.
In recent and ongoing conflicts like Iraq and Afghanistan, the highest death toll, if you like, is indigenous journalists, particularly in the case of Iraq.
Yeah, I would like that.
We've lost colleagues who were local journalists filming alongside or close to insurgents.
On the battlefield, in the heat of the moment, someone who looks different from the model of a foreign correspondent is even more at risk, because even if he is carrying a camera, even if he is carrying a tripod, the assumption seems to be that they could be hostile.
That's a weapon. Yeah.
What happened in 2007 to the two Reuters journalists in Iraq was a terrible tragedy, and one that was brought home to all of us when we saw the footage that WikiLeaks released. And I think that really brought home the horror of modern war and why it is so dangerous.
Yep, he's got a weapon too. Hotel 26, Crazy Horse 18, have 5 to 6 individuals with AK-47s. Request permission to engage.
What you had there was Apache helicopters firing on a group of people from at least 500 meters away, maybe a couple of kilometers away. You have the assumption that everyone in that group is of a type. You have the assumption that because there were weapons in that group, that everyone in that group was armed and somehow dangerous. And it became just a terrible tragedy that the gunships fired on those people. Our correspondents were killed along with others.
What's left of 2-6? We need to move time now. All right, we just engaged all 8 individuals.
We need answers to the questions about how these situations happen. We've engaged and will continue to engage very actively with the authorities because we don't take for granted that people just happen to be in the wrong place at the wrong time.
They were walking with a group where there were arms. Now, in 2007, in Baghdad, that was extremely common. Everyone was walking around with arms. But it became clear in the course of investigating this that because they were walking with this group, they were assumed to be hostile. And so we changed our rules and said, don't go anywhere near anybody who is carrying a weapon. Now, that makes it more difficult to do your job as a journalist, especially in a place where everyone is armed. But we felt it was a necessary precaution to take.
The cordon off the building that the helicopters killed the personnel on. Don't go anywhere else. Please cordon off that building so we can get on top of the roof and SSE the building. Over.
We were invited to an interview in November of 2008 with a Taliban commander just outside of Kabul, the capital of Afghanistan. The local journalist I was with had interviewed this guy before. He had done the interviews with these two European journalists, and he had not done anything. And so they had this relationship, and he felt it would be okay.
The issue of being taken hostage is a very tricky one. I mean, there are conventional ways to, if you like, avoid being a target. But at the end of the day, if someone's determined to take you hostage, then that's going to happen.
We were told to drive to a meeting point where we would meet these men who would take us to this interview. We rounded a corner and there was a car blocking the road, and these two Taliban gunmen rushed up to our vehicle. Didn't seem real at first. We thought there was some confusion. We hoped this was sort of a rough introduction for our interview, but it became, very clear that wasn't true.
The key aspect of David's kidnapping was most of the drama was played out in Waziristan, which is, the absolute bastion of the armed militant groups of the jihad in Afghanistan.
The initial demands in my case were for $25 million in cash and the release of 15 prisoners from Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. There's no kind of clear rules on what to do in a kidnapping. And, we survived, so I guess we did the right thing. But the idea that these militants are going to somehow have a sort of reasonable way of resolving the case doesn't apply. And we spent the next 7 months in captivity in North and South Waziristan, shuttled from house to house, and we were able to finally escape from captivity in June of 2009, and we made it to a Pakistani military base, and then we're allowed to go home.
The people that are most vulnerable to kidnapping are the local reporters who are doing very valuable reporting in their own locality. They are very, very much at risk.
There are some differences between the threats to the national journalists and the international journalists. In terms of the perceived rewards, somebody who's conducting a kidnapping, they expect to get more out of it if they get hold of an international journalist. But of course, if they just want to be able to pick up a national journalist, then probably nobody will come after them, and they don't have to perceive any particular threat of law enforcement action.
بودم هلاکت خوب است انسان است مگر حداقل چی خودم خود اعلام نکرد تاریخ خود
I've been detained twice, but I did feel that going into Bosnian Serb territory and being arrested there was worth it. Journalist restrictions were simply that we were not allowed into Bosnian Serb territory without an escort. I felt that they were hiding, this evidence of thousands of people dying. I went to checkpoints and said I was simply driving through Bosnian Serb territory, when in truth I was trying to find these graves. Those stories helped prove that 8,000 men and boys were executed in Srebrenica. A Bosnian Serb watchman saw me and arrested me at the site, and I was held for 10 days. I was treated well, I was never beaten, but they were convinced I was a spy. I think my kidnapping in Bosnia was basically about controlling the message. They sort of kept denying that they had carried out these executions. Right before it was released, they had me do an interview with Bosnian Serb TV where I said I found no mass graves. It was a false statement, but I was desperate.
I am very happy to be in Belgrade and very grateful to the assistance of the Serbian government in getting me here, and it's a great relief for me to leave the Republic of Serbia.
When journalists stop going to these places, the militants that are terrorizing civilians, they win. The governments that are oppressing opposition groups, they win.
our job is to report the world and to tell the rest of the world what's happening and to shine light in the darkest corners of the world. But we have to go on working very hard to find the right way of doing that, the safe way of doing that, that doesn't put journalists and news teams' lives unnecessarily at risk.
يا اسمع في دبابات قدامك طخ من فوق ضوء.
Why can anyone really think that our calling as journalists is any less important than the calling of a soldier? I don't believe it is. The sooner we understand and manage that, the sooner we're actually going to come up with safety policies that are really effective.
A journalist has to be concerned about all the contingencies that could arise, from landmines to the possibility of crossfire, to the possibility of incoming mortars, to military forces simply changing sides. So a journalist needs a certain level of combat awareness training as well as emergency first aid.
When the shelling started, I don't really remember much after that. There were a couple of close hits, and then we took a direct hit somewhere. I was injured in the leg. I think my colleague Marie Colvin is dead, and Remy also is dead, as far as I know. I don't know much at the moment.
As long as people are fighting each other and killing each other, and doing so in the acquisition of power or territory or, a point of view, journalists have to be there.
We have seen a rise in this culture of impunity in some of the world's most dangerous countries, not about talking about war zones now, but countries like Mexico, where to kill a journalist is easy censorship. So journalists who make themselves awkward, who do investigative work, who get on the wrong side of particular crime gangs or even particular political divisions make themselves vulnerable. And we've seen that rise inexorably again over the last decade.
Pues sí sientes así como una cierta inseguridad, ¿no? Porque es un peligroso el trabajo de ser reportero aquí en México. Lo han dicho organismos internacionales de periodismo, que es más peligroso ser periodista en México que en el propio Irak.
Continúa, lo que usted escucha son disparos de arma a fuego, calibre de fusil, y también hay sonido más fuerte aún de lo que está ocurriendo en esta frontera de Reynosa. El enfrentamiento entre fuerzas federales y lo que viene siendo prácticamente alguna célula de delincuencia organizada. El armamento que usted escucha en este momento.
Unfortunately, in many cases in these regions, authorities are co-opted by criminal organizations. The influence of the cartels in many of these areas is huge over law enforcement, politicians, and state prosecutors. And in most cases, these people are in charge of investigating these crimes.
Los cárteles no pueden subsistir sin la ayuda del Estado. O sea, los policías son los que les abren paso, los que dejan de investigar, los que les proporcionan vehículos, los que les proporcionan logística, y eso es lo que afecta a los periodistas en este momento.
There are people who benefit from crime, either drug barons or politicians, who want to send out a very strident signal to people in our profession. They're targeting investigative reporting. They're targeting journalists who get up every morning and want to spend time on investigating corruption.
Fear is one of the overriding characteristics affecting journalism in Mexico. Drug cartels have been basically conducting war against journalists as well as others in the community.
In pursuing what was not merely my job but my passion, I exceeded sheer reason on many occasions. So it often happened that in trying to capture the best image or dig up a scoop, I crossed the line into danger. In 2006, I received reliable information that several journalists were named on an organized crime hit list because of their reporting on the Juarez drug wars. My source told me I was on that list. I was doing some investigation related with these abuses, human rights abuses for militaries, but in the same time, this incident happened at the massacre of the rehab center. So I got information that witnesses said that at least one big truck with soldiers blocked the road to help the hitmen to be at the rehab center and kill these people. With these two investigations going side by side, I start to notice that I have been followed. One day, my wife, she go back home, and outside of his minivan, she noticed that another minivan who was following her parked just outside of the house. There's two men in the minivan. One of the men take out his arm and pointed like this. This moment is when you understand that your family, now they are in your danger. We have a phrase, it's quite common among the police officers in Mexico. They say that the heart and your stomach gives you good advices. So you have to learn to listen to them. So you feel that something is wrong. I can explain it, how do you feel or when do you feel that something is strange there. So that's when I start to say, okay, I need to leave.
According to CBJ research, more than 85% of crimes against journalists go unsolved. It's a huge problem, which in many cases perpetuates a climate of fear and intimidation where journalists and media are wide open to attacks. Impunity is a green light for those who attack journalists in places around the world.
Ya tengo más de 20 años haciendo este trabajo, es mi pasión y pues tengo que seguirlo, no puedo quedarme yo como persona callado a lo que está pasando.
Intimidation goes the whole scale, and I think you have to look on a case-by-case basis whether the journalist is simply afraid of losing his livelihood or whether that journalist is afraid of losing a limb or a family member or his life. And all these things have happened, all these things are happening, all these things are very much real for people in the journalistic community.
Usually, they call you, they send you a message through some, even for a journalist, for another journalist or a friend or a lawyer, they call you, they send you, hey, you know what, you need to stay out of this area.
En Tijuana, en finales de los 80, principios de los 90, los hermanos Arellano Félix andaban haciendo negocios de manera muy abierta, andaban reclutando jóvenes de la sociedad de manera muy abierta. Don Jesús Blancornelas estaba haciendo investigación sobre el crimen organizado y cuando Blancornelas identifica a este grupo como los criminales o los narcotraficantes que se están adueñando de las calles de la ciudad, empieza a señalarlo y obliga a las autoridades también a investigar. Los hermanos Arellano Félix mandan a asesinar a Blancornelas, producto de lo que habíamos publicado en el semanario. Ahí asesinan a Luis Valero, que era su asistente y chofer, y don Jesús, bueno, milagrosamente sobrevive. Tuvo más de 80 impactos de bala la camioneta de don Jesús. En el lugar de los hechos del atentado queda muerto uno de los sicarios. De hecho, el que iba encabezando el grupo de asesinos. Entonces, en nuestras investigaciones nos damos cuenta que esta persona pertenecía al barrio Logan de San Diego y que servía al cártel Arellano Félix. Entonces, era la principal liga para dar con los autores intelectuales del crimen. ¿Por qué, si sabemos que los líderes del cártel Arellano Félix atentaron contra la vida de don Jesús Blancornelas, por qué no están siendo juzgados por ese delito? No muchos medios, a pesar de que el narcotráfico es cada vez más fuerte y más terrible en México y lacera más a la sociedad mexicana, se atreven a hacer investigación sobre el narcotráfico, sobre el crimen organizado, precisamente por las consecuencias.
¿Qué pasó? ¿Cuál es el problema? ¿Qué pasó? ¿Qué pasó? ¿Qué te pasa? Tranquilo.
In late July, 4 journalists were kidnapped. 2 of them worked for national TV stations. And as a demand for the release, the cartel said that the national TV must broadcast some videos showing the other cartel in collusion with federal authorities. So the drug war in Mexico is not only fought in the streets, it's also a war for the control of information. And there are indications now that the cartels are trying to influence the information agenda more widespread. Cartels are telling publishers, editors, and reporters what they can publish or what they can't publish.
The sense of impunity against press is high now. Many people who can pay for kill a journalist, maybe some of them are thinking and kill a journalist because it looks like nothing is going to happen. I think they have a double purpose. One is to shut up this person, to eliminate this person, as well as to send the message to other journalists. This is going to happen if you don't follow my rules.
Reafirma su condena a los asesinatos de los periodistas Javier Uge, Guillermo Luna Varela, Esteban Rodríguez y Acema Becerra y Regina Matthies. No descansaremos en la colaboración con su gobierno para que se haga justicia a los periodistas del país.
En 2004, mi compañero Francisco Javier Ortiz Franco es asesinado también a manos del cártel Arellano Félix. Él acababa de hacer una denuncia a través de un reportaje publicado en Z de cómo estaba integrada la estructura de sicarios y lugartenientes del cártel Arellano Félix y cómo estos tenían una relación de complicidad con la Procuraduría del Estado. Creo que fue uno de los hechos que más ha afectado la vida de don Jesús, obviamente después de su atentado, porque incluso pensó en que quizá era necesario cerrar Z, que cuántas vidas más quería para entender que en México no podía hacer lo que estábamos haciendo.
The journalists themselves have tried to get the government to pass laws saying, a crime against a journalist is a federal crime. But this has all been very ineffectual. And so the journalists have to be very careful what kind of information they're revealing about the drug cartels.
Entonces tenemos periódicos que ya no están investigando el narcotráfico en México. Entonces, por supuesto que la vida de un periodista afecta no nada más a la familia de ese periodista o al medio en el que trabajaba ese periodista, afecta a muchos otros.
Censorship in Mexico is basically a result of the threat of violence imposed by the drug cartels and the failure of the government to provide minimal safety guarantees for reporters and the media to do their work without fear of reprisal. Killing of journalists is not collateral damage.
El gobierno está siendo cómplice al no investigar a los asesinos de los periodistas. El gobierno mexicano ha fallado en preservar la libertad de expresión en este país porque a veces también le es incómoda la libertad de expresión en este país.
Yo no le estoy faltando respeto a nadie. Lo voy a grabar, es mi trabajo. Es mi trabajo, no meta la mano, joven. Por eso, pero no me por eso, yo no voy a hacer nada de lo que usted me diga. Mira, órale, nomás se le va a pedir un favor. Déjeme grabar. Hubo un accidente. Por eso es un accidente, ¿cuál es el problema? Yo soy un medio de comunicación, a mí me interesan los accidentes, de eso vivo. Mire, no vuelva a meterme la mano, si quieren las cosas bien, no vuelva a meter la mano. Entonces, porque le pido, no voy a dejar de grabar, claro que no, si de esto vivo. Loco.
¿Por qué no graba los secuestros que hacen los otros?
También.
No lo veo, yo
¿Qué
dímelo.
quieres que grabe? ¿Qué quieres que grabe?
En Z nosotros tenemos muy claro que nuestro compromiso es con los lectores nada más. Consideramos nosotros que nadie, ni el gobierno corrupto, ni el gobierno abusivo, ni los narcotraficantes, ni los secuestradores, ni los criminales, tienen derecho a callar un medio que la sociedad está apoyando. La libertad y la solidaridad y el apoyo que hemos encontrado en la sociedad donde estamos inmersos es lo que nos hace salir adelante.
Crime, corruption, and violence promoted by criminal organizations, by organized crime, is devastating the Mexican press, undermining citizens' right to freedom of expression and access to information, seriously endangering the stability of the Mexican democracy.
Having seen the pervasive climate of violent crime and impunity, I could not simply let myself be killed under some lonely street light. In September 2008, I left Mexico with my family. I went to Vancouver, Canada. I'm still alive, and I'm fortunate for that. But I feel the pain of having fled my country and my profession. I now have a part-time job as a janitor, the only work I could find after 14 months of unemployment. We are alive, out of the crossfire, but having lost so much.
There have been 20 journalists murdered in Russia since 2000 when President Putin came first to office. And in none of those cases have those who commissioned the crimes been punished. Journalists are targeted for their work when, in the process of reporting, they come to cross powerful interests.
Каким будет Путин в этом сроке? Он будет закручивать гайки. Каким он будет? А вы, вот, кстати, о гайках.
Не расслабляйте.
Кстати, о гайках вы накануне
The murders of journalists have become less frequent in Russia. Attackers have favored severely injuring and even maiming journalists on the job. One prominent example of this new and frightful tendency is the case of journalist Mikhail Beketov.
Конечно, да, и были предупреждения. Сперва собаку у него убили здесь во дворе. Потом взорвали машину. Ну вот, последнее. Газета называлась «Химкинская правда». Эта газета выходила 2 раза в месяц. Михаил, значит, был главредом. Писал чистую правду. То есть он ожидал нападения, так сказать, с минуты на минуту. Ну вот где-то сделал просчет.
К Мише прислали 2 киллеров. Они его обработали прямо на территории его дома, обработали битами, переломали ноги, руки, голову пробили. В общем, чудо, что он остался живой.
Пролежал он там сутки на морозе. И только то, что он военный, он десантник, он командос. И только из-за того, что вот его такое могучее абсолютно здоровье, привело к тому, что Бекет остался жив.
He was a towering figure before the attack, and he had been long at odds with the local administration. He would not relent, and he paid the most severe price. Even though he's alive now, he cannot do his job anymore.
Вот вы когда ехали сюда, вы ехали со стороны Химок? Со стороны Химок, да? Это вот как раз весь лес хотели пустить под корень.
Химки – криминальный регион, полностью подконтрольный тамошней власти.
В городе Химки, там, где должна пролечь трасса, которую строят друзья Путина, братья Ротенберги, с помощью французской крупнейшей инвестиционного банка, люди встали на защиту леса. И Михаил Бекетов говорил, что трасса может пройти по другому месту.
Владимир Стрельченко – это мэр города Химки. И, видимо, он был заинтересован в продаже земель под строительство вот этой дороги. И все отсюда и крутится.
Такой человек, как Стрельченко, не заслуживает такой высокой должности, как мэр. Он не заслуживает представлять интересы народа.
The government will not follow up and investigate these terrible crimes against journalists. And so, for years, these crimes go uninvestigated and unpunished.
Сегодняшней акцией мы хотим сказать: руки прочь от гражданских активистов, руки прочь от журналистов, руки прочь от людей, которые честно выражают свое...
Vladimir Putin is an ex-KGB officer, so there's a whole kind of shadowy world of these operatives, many of whom are now linked into business, some of whom have links with organized crime. So if you want to do a business deal or you want to take someone out, you have access to people who can do it for you.
Эти люди действовали сами? Или у них... То есть у них не было заказчика?
Был заказчик, да?
А как вы думаете, заказчика найдут?
Ну, заказчик, он говорит, это уже неизвестно.
В каком хотя бы примерном состоянии следствия?
В тупиковом.
И почему не могут выйти на заказчика?
Ну, потому что, ну, это уже чисто мои домыслы, что здесь замешаны достаточно высокие чины.
There is a culture of impunity. In other words, killing a journalist is an easy way to get the story off the headlines, and there's very little follow-through.
Anna Politkovskaya was, without a doubt, Russia's bravest investigative journalist, but she was most famous for her reporting on Chechnya. At one point she was abducted there, and then released. She was threatened several times.
You have to be on the run all the time, change clothes, stay alert, simply to do your job as a journalist, to collect information from both sides.
The kind of terrible irony is that she was someone who faced death so many times in Chechnya, and then she was actually murdered in the lobby of her apartment block in Moscow. She was just stepping into the elevator and someone surprised her and shot her.
Расследованными, по большому счету, дела оказываются, но в них расследуется убийство, а, как правило, конфликт у журналиста возникает на уровне заказчика. А заказчиков этого убийства в деле, как правило, нет.
Novaya Gazeta, the independent newspaper based in Moscow, is probably the newspaper which knows most of what it is like to lose colleagues to work-related murders.
Погиб Игорь Домников, убит наемными убийцами. Он очень много и серьезно писал специальные репортажи про коррупцию. Погиб Юрий Щекочихин, который всю жизнь занимался противодействием коррупции. Убита Наташа Истемирова. Она после смерти немного писала. И теперь фактически Чечня – закрытая зона для большинства изданий. Убиты Настя Бабурова, молодая совсем девчонка, 20 лет, стажер, еще даже в штат не был. И Стас Маркелов, который вел множество дел редакции адвокат, также он занимался делами антифашистов, то есть он преследовал националистов, расистов.
You have a top leadership in the country that, while they give lip service to free expression, they really don't believe in it.
When Vladimir Putin comes on the record and says days after murder of Anna Politkovskaya that her role in society was insignificant, when he says that her journalism didn't matter, that gives an extremely damaging message that the journalism that she was doing doesn't matter. To this day, we don't know who ordered the gunman to her doorstep.
People sort of were guessing pretty much from the beginning who might be responsible, but it's very difficult to pin these people down, and it's very difficult to prove responsibility.
Я считаю, что волоска моего корреспондента не стоят те факты, которых он добудет. Видимо, мне уже пора с этой работы уходить, потому что я очень боюсь, и справедливо боюсь, у меня за спиной там портреты висят, рисков для своих людей, и всем объясняю, не стоит ни одной слезы ваших родителей любой материал, даже самый сенсационный, который вы приведете в газету.
Moscow police are investigating a brutal attack on a correspondent with Russia's Kommersant newspaper. Oleg Kashin was fiercely beaten near his home and is now...
Я высказывался не как расследователь, скорее, а как комментатор, который там называл дураков дураками, подонков подонками и так далее. Наверняка это многих раздражало, и, в принципе, таким большим сюрпризом нападение для меня не стало.
Какой историей вы занимались, когда нападение произошло?
Ну, было несколько историй. Первое, что мне пришло в голову, когда я очнулся, история Химкинского леса. На сам по себе лес всем наплевать. Просто в этом месте сплелись все вот такие больные точки. Да? Ну, во-первых, да, окей, хорошо, экология. Во-вторых, вот именно наглость, хамство и безнаказанность власти, которая для достижения своих целей готова там, идти и на насилие, и на обман, и на подлог, и на все на свете.
Mr. Cashin currently in a very critical condition, in a induced coma.
One video from a CCTV camera which actually captured the attack itself leaked into the internet on Monday. The police have already strongly criticized.
6 ноября ночью я шел домой, у меня дом обнесен забором с калиткой, и возле этой калитки стоял мужчина с цветами. И вот я подхожу к этой калитке, оборачивается этот мужчина, смотрит на меня, бросает букет на землю и наносит мне такой очень хороший боксерский удар в челюсть, от которого я падаю. Остальное я уже видел на видеозаписи, потому что, видимо, я от первых ударов потерял сознание. После этого второй мужчина, которого я не видел, появился из-за там такой есть темный уголок с железным прутом в руках. И этим прутом нанес мне, я пытался считать, но больше полусотни ударов по голове, особенно по области рта, то есть у меня были сломаны обе челюсти. И мне сознательно зачем-то ломали ногу, видимо, чтобы я куда-то не ходил. Еще, собственно, когда я очнулся, мне врачи сказали, что у меня просто рука была забинтована, что у меня ампутирован один палец и сломан еще один. Естественно, у меня возникла тут же романтическая версия, что мне сломали палец, чтобы я не писал. Мы спорим там, с коллегами, со следователями, хотели убивать или не хотели. Наверное, не хотели, потому что если бы хотели, вот именно была цель убить, убили бы. То, что моя история вызвала взрыв негодования среди моих коллег, именно такое единение, меня это безумно удивило, когда я пришел в себя, потому что я не представлял, что вот в такой мере есть, по крайней мере, какая-то солидарность у журналистов. Раздражение копилось, там раздражение, негодование со всеми убийствами.
I think it's just a kind of natural phenomenon. This generation, this class, is standing up for freedom of speech and
Россия без Путина! Россия без Путина! Россия без Путина! Россия без Путина!
К сожалению, проблема нашей власти не связана с выживанием нашей журналистики. Им журналистика, для того знания, которым они руководствуются, для руководства страной, им совершенно не нужны журналисты.
Покажи документ, покажи.
Вот я показываю документ прессы, эхо Москвы, фотокорреспондент.
The role of the journalist is to provide transparency, to tell what's really happening, to uncover the true story, to cut behind the propaganda, to cut behind the government line. So it's vital work. It's work that has to be done.
Газета называлась «Согласие правды», я являлся главным редактором этой газеты. Это подмосковная газета, которая издавала одноименное движение «Согласие правды». И основную цель этого издания мы ставили информировать население о чиновничьем безумии. Мы митинговали против повышения роста квартплаты. После того, как митинг закончился, я попросил людей нас сопроводить, потому что мы боялись, что милиционеры могут себя повести неадекватно. Я шел последним. Как ни странно, ко мне подошли 3 человек. Они были в штатском. Потом уже мы узнали, что это были сотрудники милиции. Вот, без объяснения причин они изломали мне руки и стали меня избивать. На счастье, просто 3000 человек свидетелей, которые не остались равнодушными. Они просто отцепили в кольцо и начали милиционеров оттеснять, бабушки с палочками там их отпихивали, кто как мог. Я несколько раз терял сознание, потому что били, естественно, по голове, когда они поняли, что они меня увезти не могут, но самое больное место — это голова. До сих пор остается вопросом, кто избил меня. До сих пор эти лица официально не установлены. Более того, милиционер, который на меня нападал, самый главный, который вот меня бил по голове, получил повышение, стал заместителем начальника сразу после вот инцидента с моим избиением.
Whenever enterprising journalists are slain or silenced or drowned and marginalized, everybody suffers.
Ну вот, к примеру, часть дела по экстремизму, который против меня заводили. Сколько пришлось бумаг? 3 экспертизы. То есть в настоящий момент для журналистов закон, который позволяет их просто отстранять от их деятельности путем обвинения их в экстремизме.
Давайте, стартом будьте добры, пройдите, пожалуйста. Давайте, пройдем.
Нельзя говорить, что в России как-то особенно опасно быть журналистом. В России особенно опасно быть кем угодно.
Я не пойду с вами никуда. Я никуда с вами не пойду. Ваши действия незаконны. Вы нарушаете мои права.
Экстремизмом называется несогласие с мнением начальства, выраженное в любой резкой форме. Как 6 гармошек растягивается до любой широты и играет при этом любую необходимую власти мелодию.
Если бы мне уже задним числом сказали, а вот не пиши про это, и про это, тогда тебе не проломят голову. Наверное, я бы сказал, идите нафиг, я все равно буду об этом писать, но в принципе это только как бы такая вредность и глупость моя, потому что, конечно, это того не стоит, безусловно. То есть я бы лучше вернул себе этот палец, на самом деле, чем написал бы лишнюю заметку, это правда.
И для Стаса можно сказать таким периодом.
It's a measure of a civil society to have an active, aggressive press. And when that starts to break down, civil society starts to break down.
Сейчас почтить память наших товарищей.
Сегодня можем ли мы говорить о том, что мы живем в гражданском обществе? Да нет, конечно. Наше общество расколото сегодня на людей, которые действительно хотят прогресса нашей страны в сторону свободной России, и огромное количество людей, которые тянут нас назад в сталинщину, в самые темные пропасти несвободы.
Это, всем понятно. Мы будем всегда говорить о том, что у нас демократия, о том, что у нас народ управляет страной. Но если у нас на местах будет твориться такая вакханалия, такое безумие чиновников, коррупционеров, бандитов, нас никто не будет уважать в мире.
We can't say that the investigative journalism is extinct, not yet. But it is an endangered species.
It only takes one journalist to be beaten or assaulted or murdered for the rest of his colleagues to think, why am I in this profession? I'm not being well compensated for this profession. What keeps me going? Isn't there an easier way of doing, making a living?
Сейчас я ушел из журналистики, и, соответственно, на мой взгляд, я пока для них, наверное, не представляю угрозы. СМСки с угрозами перестали приходить. Меня, слава богу, больше пока никто не пытался сбить машины, и милиционеры меня не сбивали. Если вдруг я окажусь опять главным редактором и начну, не дай Боже, опять их обличать во всех грехах, думаю, будет тот же сценарий. Понимаете, я переживаю за свой город. Не хочется, чтобы там было чисто и красиво. Мне хочется, чтобы у нас хватало всем детям мест в детских садах. Хочется, чтобы у нас были дороги без ям. Я всегда был неравнодушным. К сожалению, это у нас вообще невозможно работать. То есть на местах это очень нереально пока.
А есть ли вообще какие-то способы для журналистов работать?
Анонимно.
Как?
Анонимно.
Gürcü gücü olması gerekiyor ya. Geri.
I think the issue of journalist safety is something which should concern everybody and not just journalists. It should concern everybody who cares about the freedom of speech.
If you could surface some of the bravery and some of the courage that goes on in order to tell the world what's happening, then I think that society would respond better to the business of journalism and what we're trying to do.
Certainly politicians think the media is incredibly powerful. Why don't we use some of that power to support those people who need it, to support the safety of those people who are taking all these risks, by ensuring that there is a penalty more often than not for killing a journalist.
So have managed to persuade the United Nations Security Council to sign up to Article 1738, which sends out a very strong signal that you can't murder journalists and hope to get away with it.
The Daniel Pearl Act was passed, which said that the US government really called on nations to protect journalists and not to allow something like that to happen. However, much like the UN resolution, it's a statement of intent. It has no real force.
Almost everyone I know who does this has this sense of mission. If you are in a war zone and see something happen in front of you that shouldn't be happening, and you bring that back to where the policymakers are, and they see that and they change the policy, you are doing your job.
I am optimistic. I think that you see spreading around the world this general desire for the rule of law and for governments that are more accountable to their people. People want information. They want judicial systems that are independent. As that continues, you will see that there will be accountability for people who abuse journalists and less impunity.
It's really common, I think, for people to be looking for new sources of information. And I think that that really underscores and puts more importance on journalism and how great the need is. It's like we need fresh air to breathe. You know, we need it, we know it when it's not there, we suffer from its lack, and we're going to look for it.
Moi, j'ai une vision toujours un peu romantique du métier de journaliste. J'adore mon métier, c'est ma passion, c'est ma vie. Et je crois que notre métier est dans la prise de risque aussi. Alors il faut la contrôler, il faut faire très attention, d'autant plus attention, mais je ne pense pas qu'on puisse se permettre de dire à un pays, donc nous, on n'y va plus, au revoir tout le monde, et on vous appellera dans quelques années quand ça ira mieux pour interviewer ceux qui ont survécu. Ça, on peut pas se permettre de faire ça quand on est journaliste.
Is part of a conversation that's now leaning forward. Not only does it want to know about what's going on, it wants to influence the outcome. So the most humble person anywhere in the world with a handheld telephone can play a part in that conversation and can influence the outcome.
Anywhere that there are journalists working, I think, is actually good for democracy, good for society, good for the population at large. People need to know. People need to be able to make up their own minds.
Ce qui nous intéresse quand on dit ça, c'est de dire la presse, c'est nous parce qu'on écrit, mais c'est vous parce que vous la lisez. Et défendre la liberté de la presse, c'est vous défendre, c'est pas nous défendre.
Killing of journalists, it's not a question that is directed to journalists. This is a question that is directed to society.
When we put something on the air that help someone who had no way to reach the levers of power. That's what the fourth estate is all about. That's why I'm risking my life.